I grew up in a world of work where we never really spoke about our emotions or what was going on for us. But what I'm noticing recently is a big movement towards understanding our emotions and how they play out at work. My conversation on today's episode of the Happier at Work podcast is with Kinga, Mnich, and we talk all about emotions at work, how they show up, how they shape our identity, and how they can help us to choose who it is that we want to be. We have a really, really insightful discussion. So if you want to understand more about yourself, tap into your emotions and how to use those in a positive way in the way that you show up at work, definitely check out today's episode and do let me know what you think. Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Kinga, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you as my guest today. Do you want to let listeners know a little bit about what you do and how you got into doing what you're doing today?
Sure, yeah. Hi. Thanks so much for having me here. Well, I'm a social psychologist, trained social psychologist. I have my PhD in particular actually focused on emotions and how we create identity through emotions and use it in order to build systems. Um, so in a practical way, how does it look like when we do organizational development, culture building? How do we navigate between people, form interactions? How do we see each other, one another, and an individual, as a person based on how we now created that culture? So with that, I do a lot of consulting in companies and executive leadership coaching. Which right now, like I'm really very much, in tune into the leadership coaching development space because I just started again another training. So yeah, that's kind of like where I am right now.
Brilliant. And I love that it's you never arrive at the destination. There's always more to learn, I think, and being really open to taking on new challenges and learning new things. I'm curious to dive in a little bit to this idea of emotions and identity and how that shapes culture and the kinds of challenges that organizations have when it comes to that.
Yeah. It's especially in an organization, right? We for many years believed that emotions are a distraction and they make us soft, they make us irrational, they don't help us to create better decisions. Now, of course, through emotional intelligence, that has shifted a little bit the perspective on all of it. But when we look specifically into emotional intelligence, we look more at how do we manage emotions and how do we manage them within ourselves and how do we manage them in others. Now, in my research and everything that I've been working on for really over 15 years now, I've been looking more so on those underlying aspects of emotions, meaning I will be showcasing specific emotions in order to make someone else believe who I am. So, like for example, for men, that can be quite often specific anger, right? Like that makes you seem more masculine or not expressing happiness in the moment, even though you're excited about a project. For women, it will be, very slight, kind happiness, that politeness, and you don't want to overexert yourself because then you could be labeled as hysterical. And when you go into organizations, different organizations have their own cultures, and in those within that culture, there is also a rule set of emotions, meaning on how do you express them, how do you use them, and how do you use them also within interactions. And so that really depends on, company to company. I worked within the merger and acquisition sector for a while, and it was very interesting to kind of like see the broness and brotherhood, and like there was almost like an initiation emotional ritual, when like every year when new people came in. And then you go into other corporations, where you have to support potentially more female leadership and everything is just a little bit more softer. You have more open communication. So it's interesting because we come in to organizations with our own set of understanding of emotions, right? And that set is determined by the family that we have grown up with, the language that we have grown up with, the society and the culture. And that is not the same for everyone. And we always assume that, like if I feel love, you feel love, and we both will have the same understanding of love. And I feel like almost love is always the best example of it, because how often people say, I don't feel loved by you, because you have a different understanding of what love is, and that other
Mm.
person has a different understanding. So if you don't communicate about it, it's very easy to get to that miscommunication. And it's the same when we are in bigger aggregates, so in bigger organizations where we have to take into account actually the emotional diversity. So it's not just the culture, but the aspect of how do you perceive and use emotions. I grew up in Germany, and Germany is very, straightforward. You're very controlled. You manage your emotions very well. My husband is Mexican. Yes, he is an engineer, but nevertheless, he's Mexican. And it's the funniest thing. Sometimes, we will have conversations and I will be like, yeah, this is funny. And he's like, I don't see you at all being amused by this. Like I'm like, yeah, it's funny. And he's like, yeah, but can I see like, physically the expression of it?
Mm.
And that is, it's so interesting because like once we start getting into those nuances and we understand that people just work differently and have a different way of communicating emotions and understanding them, I think that we can become a lot kinder with one another, because it's not a reflection of us in that interaction, but it is just a reflection of who that person is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And is
Yeah.
that so? If I'm kind of reading between the lines here, it's from our own cultural background and how we grew up, layered upon the family interactions that we would have had when we were growing up. And maybe there's a role to play of personality and a unique communication style that people have. Not everyone communicates necessarily in the same way. Some people are a little bit more direct, or they want to get straight to the point. Other people prefer to build relationships before they get to the point. Some people love all of the detail and things like that. So is it kind of a few different layers altogether
Yes.
to
Yes.
make this thing?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's how we relate to each other at
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And it's really, it's like, did you grow up in a family that spoke about emotions, right? Did you grow up in a family that allowed it? Or did you grow up in a family that the moment you started crying, someone said, boys don't cry or girls don't cry, or someone that is strong doesn't cry, or don't be so weak, or, whatever labels come with it. It's like one thing that I always like to tell people, when they start working with me, I say, disconnect to reconnect, right? Disconnect from everything that you think that you know and you believe is yours.
Mm.
Explore it from the outside, and then start connecting to it in a way it A, benefits you, and B, is more so an expression of who you want to be. And that is like, especially in this whole, we have this big momentum right now going on, especially here in the US, with authenticity, right? Be an authentic leader, be an authentic person, da 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 da. And sometimes it seems as people are trying to make someone else understand authenticity is like this core thing of you that is not changeable. But that's not true. We always evolve, we always change. We are always on the path of moving forward, even if we are not aware of it. So why not take a moment and take the time to disconnect from what you believe is who you are, to then actually pick, oh, this is what I want to be, because this is what brings me joy. This is what makes it easy for me. This is how I want to perceive life. And so when with emotions, we believe, or we are being made to believe that emotions happen and we react to them almost automatically. But we can also take a step back, and instead of reacting to it, base our actions on them. And so I refer to emotions more so kind of like a sixth sense, like the emotions bring all your senses together and they give you an understanding of where you stand on, like what is your opinion on something, how do you feel about a situation, how do you feel about a person, And so if you use emotions more so as an internal compass, as a direction, then you have the ability to choose how you're going to be acting towards them or based on them.
I love that as an approach, just simply because I think I won't even say that we're brought up with this idea, but certainly it's ingrained in us somewhere along the line that emotions, we feel them and then we react based on them. And I have heard this a while ago, that it's about catching yourself and responding rather than reacting. But I think you've explained it in a slightly different way. And I love this idea then that authenticity is, it's being true to yourself, but also with the knowledge that we are constantly evolving. So just because you are a certain way at a certain point in time doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to stay that way. And what came to mind was Maya Angelou saying, when you know better, do better. You know, so as you change and evolve, maybe as you grow in self-awareness, you choose, and this is what I'm hearing from what you're saying, so you can choose who you want to be. You can use your emotions as a guide, and maybe we can talk about how to trust what you're feeling as well.
Yeah.
But you can use your emotions as a guide to steer you in the direction that you want to go based on how you're feeling internally. So kind of using it as a compass, but then you get to choose how you want that to play out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's and I think it's actually as simple as that.
Yeah.
That's the magic in it.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, it's there's some I read the other day an African Nigerian philosopher. It's a book on on some Nigerian traditions and philosophies. I don't want to go deeper into this. It's not necessary for it. But what I loved is they have a concept, and I forgot the name on it, but the concept basically said that as a human being, we have two aspects of one another. It's the emotional and the rational. And so if we make a decision that is based on either or, it is an incomplete decision. A complete decision that can so a decision that can guide you to the success and to the outcome that you want has to be always a decision that takes both into account. And when I read that, I loved it, because I've been consistently saying in my workshops, there is no such thing as a non or unemotional decision. Emotions
Yeah.
are always based on it. So either you are aware of them, or you're trying to suppress them, which can be
Okay.
really dangerous.
Yeah.
But they are always there, especially when we are interacting with other people, and because it's such a core point of how we are interacting with one another.
Brilliant. And my understanding of how we make decisions is that this is what I understood it to be, that they're always emotional, but actually we look back upon a decision and try and rationalize it and say, I did this because, but actually the basis, the foundation of the decision is largely based on how we feel. Probably going back to your point, that we're suppressing those feelings, that they're not in our conscious awareness, but that is actually how we're making our decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that people that are really aware are capable of doing the 50-50, right? They're very aware of what the intuition and what the sensations are telling them, and they're capable of really bringing up the knowledge. But especially when we are making decisions about circumstances or things that have unknown outcomes, or we are trying to create something that has never been created before, how can we rationalize that?
Yeah.
It's like we're always tapping in it. It's more so about understanding that you're not holding yourself back based on fear, and instead of that, you're using it in order to move forward. But that is the closest that you will get to logical, well, to rational thinking. I think that logic is, a little bit of a different component, but yeah.
Brilliant. And I suppose I'd love to understand a little bit more about how this plays out in the workplace. And is it the case that from very early career, certainly when I was starting out in work, you basically check yourself at the door. You come in, and not that you're supposed to behave like a robot, but you're not supposed to be expressing emotions explicitly at work. You're not taught how to navigate how you're feeling in order to make better decisions. So is that like one of the driving factors behind us not really talking about emotions at work, not understanding how they play out in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it stems also partially from, the bias or the label that emotions make you weak,
Mm,
that emotions are irrational. And so if you're irrational, you cannot make good decisions. That emotions are The problem with emotions is they are so complex that I think people are afraid of the inability to really describe them. When you have numbers in front of you, it's very easy, right? I mean, there are some numbers when we put them together, but how often are these numbers put together by emotions? It's just so funny. I mean, like business, business evaluations. I love that, company hits the stock market. Yeah, if anyone has ever seen this process, exactly like, okay, this is like kind of made up map that is based on the intuition of a lot of people. Um, so I yeah, I think it's especially, I think that there's also a little bit of a gender difference, right? I think that men in general, like they come in to the door and they are less emotional is the wrong word. I haven't found the right word for it, but they're more composed in the way that they hold their emotions easier back.
mm,
And for women, it is potentially visually like you're more aware of it in the sense of that you're more aware of it, that it's part of you, that it's not just something that happens within you, but it is actually part of your identity.
mm.
And for men, it's like it's part of your identity not to have them.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask. Actually, was like driving into gender, and is that one of the kind of forces behind not really talking about emotions at work, and the fact that there are growing numbers of women in those more senior leadership positions, that we're seeing more talk of emotional intelligence and understanding more about the role emotions play at work in order to have a more successful career.
Yeah. You know, that's a very that's a that's an excellent question. Uh, from where I stand right now, there's not a lot of research on this particular, movement on why is this happening. It's more so, right, that we have all this talk about mental health, and so emotions, are part of mental health. We have the talk of job satisfaction and life satisfaction. There's a movement away from the work-life balance to more the ability of being able to flourish in as a holistic human being within the interaction of your workspace and your private space. So it's not either or, right? It's more so the question of how do we integrate it, and anything, especially when it comes to the word of integrating and bringing things together. I think emotions are part of it, and so it's funny, a lot of people won't use that word in even in workshops that they give or things that they describe, and you're sitting there and you're like, you're talking about emotions, but they still feel like this hesitance of
Mm.
using it.
Yeah.
Um, like for some time also, like I think like some of my profiles you could see it. I was very particular saying like, if you work with me, we will work with your emotions, right? We are going to be using your emotions in order to help you to become a more effective leader. And the feedback that I've been receiving, during that time was very much like, yeah, but I don't have a problem with my emotions. Like, this is not what
Oh.
I need.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
like I'm not saying that you have a problem with your emotions,
Yeah,
and at the end of the day, right, when you start working with someone, you do go into how does it make you feel? How do
yeah.
you feel? What is happening, right? Because that is the awareness that we are trying to create. Um, so so I don't know if it's necessary just because more women are moving into higher positions that we are
Mm.
bringing that topic up more, or as a as a society, we are realizing that we've been just telling ourselves continuously a lie.
Yeah, yeah. And if people are not using the word emotions, what kind of language are they using to describe what they're talking about?
Um, their experience, it's a drier they will particularly explain the problems and the obstacles that they are facing
Mm,
and use words such as stress and burnout and anxiety, um, inability to make decisions, not knowing how to set boundaries, which all of that goes back to the basis of understanding your emotions
mm,
and then being able to use them
mm.
to set boundaries, right? To prevent burnout, to create less stress, to be able to be a more integrated person, if that makes sense. It's like, I really like using actually the word integrated because it also allows you to understand when someone is criticizing you or attacking you. What they do is they attack one particular part of you that you believe that is part of who you are and is essential to who you are. And so it's almost like you feel disintegrated. Someone has been taking away something from you. And so when you are able to pull all this together and understand who you are, you're you're standing in your integrity, and then you can start setting the right boundaries, using the right language, and standing the ability to, I guess, stand in your power,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
really, yeah.
No, I love that approach, and I love this idea of being a more integrated person, because what that sounds like to me is that if someone does launch an attack on you, for to use kind of
Yeah.
the language that you were talking about, if someone launches an attack, it's kind of, I hope, going to slide
Yeah.
off like water off a duck's back, because
Yeah.
you know who you are. And so if someone challenges who you think you are, you can be safe in the knowledge that that is not me. I know who I am. And also, kind of building on that point, that when someone is in that mode towards you, it's more about them rather than it is about
Mm.
you. Would that be
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
But I
It,
love the idea of understanding emotions. And I don't think I've heard anyone say this before: understanding emotions to deal with things like stress, burnout, and lack of boundaries, and inability to make decisions, which I think is like a state of overwhelm, which is,
mm,
again, it's a feeling that we have, that we create. And going back to your earlier point, would you choose to be like this? Is this who you choose to be? And sometimes we do. We choose to be in victim mode, and I'm so overwhelmed all the time, and I'm too busy, and I have too much work.
mm,
But taking that step back to understand, who am I and who do I choose to become,
mm,
and how do I get there, by understanding how I'm in
mm.
touch with my emotions and what's going on for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You were actually saying something, and there are two things. It just reminded me of two things.
Yeah.
Um, I I do believe that sometimes we choose to be a more complicated person, and I do believe that we sometimes make the choice to be someone that we don't necessarily want to be,
Mm.
out of the purpose to feel something. And I had that the other day. I called my best friend and I said, I think that I'm depressed. And she said, You're not, you're just bored. You need problems. And
Love that.
it was so funny, because when she said it, I'm like, ah, you're painfully right about this.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
really painful.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
this is so true. And so I went to my husband and I repeated it, and he just looks at me. He's like, yeah, like what are you telling? Like I know this, Like I will go and make something to be a problem, not because it's necessarily one, just because it's so much easier for us to feel difficult emotions, strong emotions, than light emotions that help us to expand. So like generally people will refer to emotions as positive and negative.
Mm.
But in positive psychology and the work that I've been doing, like we really try to move away from those labels, because an emotion is an emotion. At the end of the day, it's a chemical reaction, and it
Mm.
goes. like it either lifts you up and brings you up, or, like it makes you contract and just like kind of like try to move away from things. And because of our negativity bias and the way most societies are structured, right, we do pay more attention to things if they're unpleasant than pleasant. And so it's also a lot easier to recreate unpleasant emotions and
Mm.
memories and recreate it with it. Uh, and I think that, and that's something, it's something, that when she said it, I'm like, man, you're so right. I'm like, and for how many other people is this actually the case? So, we lived in South Africa for quite some time. And she's like, yeah, you were consistently busy and you were part of something and you had really the feeling that you're contributing and you're getting back. Now you're living a little bit like in a Lala scenario, like, which is true. I mean, there's nothing to complain about. As a German, that's also really hard to say, right? Like everything is fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I can't
Um,
complain. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
Love
can't complain.
it.
And so we create issues. And I would really want to challenge also some of the listeners, like
Mm.
to look at your own life and see, where am I creating issues because I'm making myself feel specific things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm trying to think how that might play out in the workplace. So if someone particularly likes drama, for example, maybe they'll engage in gossip, or if someone, and I like how you've referenced you like a big meaty problem to solve, but maybe that makes you feel important. And you're like, if I have a big problem to solve, then that makes me feel good. And we choose specific scenarios because of how they're going to make us feel at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting about this negativity bias, because subconsciously then we could be choosing something that is not good for us, that
Mhm.
is going to harm us in some way or keep us small out of fear, out of whatever reason, but we choose those scenarios for ourselves rather than choosing to expand.
Mhm. Yeah. And in the workplace, by the way, with what you were saying, how often do people create stressful situations and situations that are actually not stressful?
Yeah.
By
Guilty.
saying like,
Yeah,
oh, this needs
I'm sure I've done that.
to
Yeah.
happen faster, all of this needs to be done at the same time. It needs to,
Yeah.
the inability to set priorities and structure something,
Yeah.
and also allow it to potentially give space to things moving off the to-do list just because they now became less relevant because you've now created new findings or whatever. I mean, there are
Yeah.
so many aspects of that. So yeah, and mm, when it comes to that emotionality part and emotions, if I may, I just had a few clients that had a similar scenario. So women that are in high middle management, on the verge of stepping higher and trying to figure out how to do it and strategizing also for it. But then in feedback sessions, receiving the feedback that they just don't have what it takes because they're too emotional,
Wow.
or they experience or they feel too much, or they're too expressive through their emotions, just because they show excitement, if a exciting project comes into the firm, or because they show excitement about a solution. And one of my clients, she asked me, she's like, what's wrong with me being excited about this? This means that I care about this.
Mm.
And the feedback from her superior, like then having to know, this, you're too emotional, so you don't have what it takes to
Mm.
be a leader. And that's, it's really interesting because a good leader, right? A good CEO, a good manager creates a space in which the people around them can be their best version, because they're the ones that are specialized. They are the ones that bring in specific skills. And a good leader knows how to bring in the different pieces of a puzzle and then bring it all together in order to achieve a bigger goal. But to be able to do so, this has a lot to do with how we actually manage people's feelings, because we want to create trust. So, it's so interesting, to hear how often still women are being criticized for being in tune with their emotions, for also expressing it. And by expressing it, they're creating much better ability to connect with others.
Yeah. I'm
And it has not,
curious.
yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, finish. I
No,
cut
go
you
on.
off.
Sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm curious where I'm curious who the leader was, where this feedback came from, and was that from a man or was that from a woman?
Both.
Okay, that's interesting. That's
Both.
interesting.
Both. And that is, and so I think in that one particular scenario, I think it has to do a lot with organizational culture. And and with the other one, it was specifically where it was the female leader, just like the female superior. I think there are a little bit of different dynamics sometimes involved in it. I don't know
Yeah,
how much of it is the woman that is afraid to um the one that is afraid to have to make space or share, or is afraid that her position is going to be taken away by someone else that is rising.
yeah,
Like I think that there are sometimes different dynamics involved in it.
yeah, yeah. I think those kinds of dynamics are so interesting and so pertinent, and something that we spoke about on the podcast before is this idea of the queen bee syndrome, so that when a woman gets to a certain level in an organization, she protects her power, essentially, that she doesn't want
Yeah,
to give that power away. Maybe she had a struggle on the way up, and so she doesn't want other people to have it easy. She's going to make it
yeah,
hard for others to get to where she has gotten to, rather than, as we see so often encouraged, putting the hand down, mentoring, helping women to rise up and share that knowledge of like what worked well for you and what could potentially work well for me.
yeah,
What are some potential barriers that could get in the way?
yeah.
Any thoughts around like that whole dynamic of the queen bee syndrome?
I mean, it's a difficult one, because you have to build trust in order to be able to perhaps acknowledge it or speak about that, right? I mean, it's really difficult
You can't
to
just
go
out
to.
come out
We
and
cannot
challenge it and
like,
say, I think you're
hey,
doing this.
do you think
Yeah,
like that you might be making this way too difficult for me? Um, but I think that the person that is under someone with a queen bee syndrome, right? I think that person has to build up really emotional resilience, unfortunately,
mm,
and then try to communicate more directly and challenge certain things. So, for example, if the person is hovering over them and wants to, it's micromanaging everything, perhaps to say, hey, you know what? I think that I could deliver much better results if I get a little bit more space in this.
yeah,
Or in the past, I've managed to achieve this goal and that, and this has been really successful, and we still see the positive implications of it. I would really appreciate it if I could get, the chance again to prove myself in this regard. There are scenarios where you just simply have to change the job,
yeah,
right? Or, speak with HR or try to change the position. Um, because sometimes, some people just won't get the hint at it. Um, so yeah, so I think for me, it's like really clear communication and speaking from a perspective of I, right? And highlighting what you have achieved. And I think that's something that's quite difficult for women also to say
mm,
what they have achieved, because women
yeah,
are always afraid that they will be seen as bragging.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Why do you think that's different for men and women?
There is actually really interesting research on that. And it has to do a lot with how we are being raised and how
Mm,
often boys are being made to play team sports and girls not.
interesting. Yeah,
And boys are being placed into situations where they learn to cope with failure and losing, but at the same time being consistently also pushed towards winning. And so
Mm.
when they win, they talk about it, right? Because now they achieved something. Um, and girls quite often, unfortunately, are not being placed into a team sports and competitive sports still. And it's still the case. So it's really about the communication and how we raise girls. There is also that interesting study, the dream gap study.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah.
after the Barbie movie and all that, they put
Mm.
it together with NYU, and which shows, that at the age of 5, girls stop believing that they can become anything they want.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just like, I don't know, like that just breaks my heart.
It
Like,
is.
sorry.
It
Just
is
like,
heartbreaking. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and that is not just, that's not just the immediate family, right? That's TV, that's the people around you, that's school, the teachers, like that's everyone. Um, so yeah, so with that, being more aware of your emotions, I think is really the key, because you can also then understand what is happening within you, understanding the moments when you're perhaps creating fear and holding yourself back,
yeah.
from the speaking up for yourself, standing up for yourself. Um, yeah.
That's so interesting. Something that we touched on earlier in the conversation is this, something I would love to explore a little bit more, is this idea of emotions and how you tap into those emotions, and how maybe you decipher between something that is an emotion and something that is another type of signal that we're feeling in our body, whether that is a physical sensation or what. And something else that I think just adds maybe a complicated layer on top of that are hormones for women as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, if you know of any research in relation to that specifically for
Mhm.
women.
Mm. Well, I mean, there's an interesting conversation in academia and research if we actually even need the word emotion because of everything that you just said.
Yeah.
Because the question is, what is the particular difference between a inner body sensation and an emotion?
Mm.
Right, so usually, like when we think about emotions and psychology, the first thing that pops up in my mind is this wheel, that has like over 300 words for emotions
Yeah.
listed. So I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. There's technically a difference between emotions and feelings, and depending
Okay.
on where on the side of research you're standing, you're using them as equal, or first comes the feeling, then comes the emotion, or first comes the emotion, then the feeling.
Mm.
Um, so don't hold me on any of that. But to make it simpler, in my research and everything that I do, is the bodily sensation within your body is the emotion.
Mm.
The expression of it is the feeling, and the expression of it, the feeling, is already something that is coupled with past memories, experiences, the
Oh
current
yeah. Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
thought through. So it's not a pure sensation.
Mm.
So an emotion is a pure sensation, while once we start verbalizing it, we are socializing it and we're putting it into a cultural
Yeah.
context.
Everything comes back then.
Yes. So like there are societies, when you say that you are in love, you're going to be pitied for it
Mm.
because it's not a positive, it's not being labeled in that form as a positive emotion.
Yeah.
So in your inner body, everything that you're experiencing that is making you move towards something or withdraw from something
Mm.
is then a feeling, sorry, an emotion. Um, And I want to put out the claim, I don't think it's even necessary to label it, as long as you know if this is helping you or preventing you from something.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I think that's so interesting. And so I think there's been a huge focus on giving something a label, being able to name the
Yeah,
specific emotion that you're feeling. And like you say,
yeah,
those 300 different words that stem from
yeah.
previously what would have been
Yeah.
considered positive and negative. But now
Yeah.
you're saying, okay, and again, something that we've talked about on the podcast before, and I love this idea, it's a towards move or an away move from something that you
Yeah.
want. And dare
Yeah.
I say, and this could be the topic for a whole other podcast episode, but dare I say that sometimes we choose the away move because it's familiar to us, because it's something that we experienced when we were younger and we want to feel
Yeah.
that kind of emotion again
Yeah.
because it's familiar to us, not because it's helping us, but because it feels familiar and familiar feels good.
Yeah. And when it comes to, getting older and having hormonal shifts, or not even getting older, I mean, we can even go back into just, when you have your regular cycle, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like there's the beginning, just after your period, you start feeling super confident, very strong, everything is fine. And then it starts to just kind of like make you withdraw more. So that's how we know that estrogen and progesterone plays a role in. And I mean, call me crazy, but when I work with my female clients, I quite often make them tune their calendar according to their cycle.
Mm.
And I will also ask them where they are in the cycle. And I will do that as a reflection, So when someone says it's more difficult for me to make a decision, so obviously you shouldn't be making this decision now. Push it off by a week
Yeah.
because you are just in the withdrawal phase. Or, with lawyers and judges, right? Like we know so much about what time of the day is going to be impacting a judgment. And we know
Oh,
when you're
look,
going to
it's
be,
5 to 5. I need to get out of here quickly. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like, like around noon, people get hungry
Yeah.
and they get hangry.
Mm.
And it's not a like yeah. And so for women, it's just, I think the general awareness of understanding there are days, when I have a sense of fear of heights, which is weird, like I climb and I jump out of planes and all of that. But then there are few moments sometimes, throughout the month where I'm afraid of heights.
Mm.
And that is obviously something because something, changed in me. I mean, this all these hormones are chemicals within our brain. Of course, they're impacting us.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. That's my last thing, I promise. Same thing for men. So we always say women are the ones that are more emotional and are the ones that have difficulties to make rational decisions. The more testosterone you have in your brain, the less you can think rationally and logically.
Interesting.
So, under stressful situations, it's very difficult for men to make clear decisions. That's the reason. That's also one of the reasons that study showed during the crisis in 2008 and 9, the companies that were better performing were the ones that were led by women because they were able to keep a cool head. Say, and I mean, and like knowing this, it's really interesting because we need a little bit of testosterone, right? Like to feel a
Mm.
little bit more confident. So you have all these hero postures, like you hold the arms up for 5 minutes, or you put the arms into, you straighten up. And like what it does, it literally induces testosterone into your brain. So I do that before public speaking. I've done that always before any kind of big exams. But men have already that testosterone. So, depending on their age, depending on their levels, depending on what they are, when they get under stress, they get the reversed effect of it. And no one talks about that.
Okay, that's
So,
interesting.
so I
Yeah.
appreciate what you were asking. Yes, I mean, we are aware of it, but no one talks about the other,
Yeah.
the other side of the story. Like men have hormones,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
lots of them.
Yeah.
So,
But I
yeah.
think that's super interesting for a few different reasons. That you mentioned the 2008-2009 financial crisis where
Mhm.
the top companies, or the ones I suppose that performed better, were run by women. But what I suppose what we don't see, and when we talk about emotions, I think we think of them as touchy feely, fluffy, happy type of
Yeah.
experiences.
Yes.
And what we forget is that some emotions are things like anger, frustration, and maybe that's what was going on for those senior men in those senior positions when something terrible was going on around them and they were clutching at straws and living in fear and trying to fix fix everything for their company, but they weren't making sound decisions because they were
Yes.
relying on their emotions, which were guiding them off track.
And not being aware of it.
Or not being even aware of it.
No,
Yeah.
so, so doing it, but not being aware of it. I think that's where, I don't think that emotions in any form are dangerous if you are aware.
Yeah.
I think that they become dangerous if you are not aware.
Yeah.
And so it's like, like I'm putting right now this article together, and I came also across this whole thing of decision making and risk taking, right? We say that women take less risks. That's true depending on the scenario. So it's actually a really complex topic, but women take longer times in order to make a decision. Testosterone cuts down the time of making that decision. So therefore, men do take faster risks than women. But that is not a good thing that we have seen in data. That longer period of time and really weighing out all the different scenarios, especially when it comes to business. I'm talking really now just business. It is much better for companies, to the extent that one of the studies has shown that from the moment a female CEO is being installed in a company to within the first 24 months, the stock prices go up by up to 20%.
Wow.
So I think I think we need that risk sometimes, right? Sometimes when you're working on something, you're trying to create a solution within the company in tech, especially in tech, right? We are trying to create solutions for partially problems that don't even really exist. It's something that has never been done before. So you have to risk it, right? You have to go out because you're going to be learning based on those problems. So taking the faster risks is great because you are in the process of learning. Now you have established everything, and you have to just be a little bit more cautious with it. We need both. Like, we need both in order to really create something that is viable and makes really sense.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you don't want to be operating too slowly because you might miss opportunities. But on the other hand, you can't be making fast decisions all the time because that's too risky.
Yeah.
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 Brilliant. Love it. Now,
No.
I think that brings us to a nice conclusion on everything that we were talking about. And we could probably stay here talking for another few hours on all of these different topics. And I'd love to dive into, like, well, how do we get more women into those senior positions if the companies perform better? Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
For me, is to be able to flow, to be able to have freedom and the space to move around, meaning have your own ideas, explore, less rules, more flexibility. I think the more flexibility part is really important. I know that's not for everyone, but that's kind of like who I am. I need to be able to decide, like, today I'm going to be working 16 hours, tomorrow just 4.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Love that.
So
And if people want to
flexibility.
reach out, if they want to connect, if they want to find out more about what you do and your work, what's the best place they can do that?
Honestly, the best place is, I think, actually my website, because they can also go from my website anywhere. So that's just simply kingamnich.com is the website, and you can from there go on LinkedIn or any other platforms. But I post on a regular basis blog posts, where I try to put in as much data and research into it and tools. So honestly, that's the best place.
Brilliant. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for your time today. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, we could have gone on chatting for another few hours, I think, but trying to solve the world's problems. But I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Appreciate that.